With game 6 going back to Philly, do you think the 76ers have any shot to extend this series against the Heat to 7 games?
To be honest, bias aside for the James Harden hatred, I don't think so because the entire team shot inefficiently outside of Joel Embiid this game. Joel Embiid wasn't incorporated necessarily into the offense early enough, in my opinion, until the second half when it was too late. Philly is incapable of stopping a nosebleed from what I saw yesterday to where they were just giving up shots left and right. They were giving up layups. Miami was penetrating in the paint. Miami was getting good looks. I mean, you name it, they did it. I mean, even their bench came in and they got double-digit points and contributions from multiple people. I mean, we're talking about Oladipo got 13, Hero got 10, Strus had 19, Gabe Vincent had 15. Like, it's kind of crazy. Like, Miami went off in all facets of the word. In Philadelphia, their big, I guess, three or four, depending on who you want to include in that, was just awful. James, again, 5 of 13, 14 total points, 4 turnovers. Tyrese Maxey, the, unsung hero for this postseason run that the Sixers have been on, 2 of 10, 9 points. He had 2 turnovers. Joel Embiid, 7 of 12, like I stated, he didn't really get incorporated until it was too late, but he ended with 17 points, and he did actually end up getting hit in the face where he fractured his orbital bone, so that is something to monitor. The mask just wasn't enough. I believe him and Dwayne Dedman were going up for a ball, and Dedman hit the ball into his face. He ended up coming back into the game, but, again, just something to monitor. Danny Green isn't necessarily known to be a prolific scorer. When he's hot, but he only had 6 points. And then Tobias Harris, 5 of 14, 12 points. It's not enough. The Sixers had 15 turnovers. The Sixers actually shot arguably worse than the Mavericks, except they made one more three, so probably not. So they shot 28% from three, 36% from the field, 93% from the free throw line. Dude, the starters for Miami all went into double figures, including PJ. PJ had 10. Jimmy had an incredible game with 23. Bam had 12. Vincent had 15. Strus had 19. It's crazy, bro. It is absolutely insane. They were just shooting at such an efficient clip, 53.6% from the field. I watched this game. Miami was getting every look they wanted, and Philly just came out flat. I think Charles Barkley made a great point when he said that Joel came out and it looked to be distracted with the result of the MVP voting. And obviously, congratulations to Nikola Jokic winning his second consecutive NBA MVP. We'll get into that in a moment also. But in general, I think it kind of affected Joel that he didn't win. I think he came out a little distracted, his head kind of in the clouds and things of that nature. Again, I could be wrong. I'm just giving my personal opinion because he just didn't really seem to demand the basketball when the game had started like he normally does. He didn't really have an aggressive presence. And then, of course, when the rest of the team is just completely shooting inefficiently and Miami is getting back in transition and scoring at the efficient clip that they were, I think it was going to be hard for anybody to get into a rhythm. So Philly's in bad shape right now. Miami's riding a big high. They got that big win at home. They showed that their defense can get it done. Jimmy Butler stressed in the post-game press conference, even if they're not hitting those shots, if they just focus on defense, offense will come. Jimmy's always been that kind of player. And I think Miami moves on to the Eastern Conference Finals, man. I don't think Philly's going to be able to overcome this much of a stigma and this much of a fallout because it just didn't look good at all. And I mean, I know we got embarrassed too, but 35 points, we got embarrassed by 30. It just does not look good because Philly's got way more help than Dallas does, and they're still not going to be able to get enough to combat this strong number 1 seeded Miami Heat team.
Well, I actually think that Philly has a decent shot of actually winning game 6, and it's pretty simple. It's based off of those games, the game 3 and game 4 performances that they had, because when you look at game 3 specifically, they held Miami to under 80 points. That was a defensive battle, and Philly just wiped the floor with Miami in that one. So I got to give Philly some credit with that one. And in game 4, that was the game where I think finally Philly saw a James Harden signing, because up until this point, James Harden has been, I would say, subpar overall. I don't think James Harden has lived up to the expectation that I think the 76ers organization had when they brought him into the fold. And I think 76ers fans have been largely let down by his presence so far. Not as much as what Ben Simmons did last year, because that was to a whole nother level to the way that Ben did the 76ers last year in the playoffs. But when you have James Harden really only have one good game this entire series and really this entire playoff stretch that they've been on, that's largely been disappointing, but they did get it from him in game four. And with this game going back to Philly for game six, there's a very good chance that they could actually win game six and force a game seven. And it's pretty simple. So when I look at Philly, granted, they got absolutely destroyed in game five. There's no other way to put it. When you get beat by 35 points on the road in a pivotal game five, it's embarrassing. It's one of those losses where you either bounce back saying that wasn't us, that we put that in the rear view, and then you just focus on the next game ahead of you, and they could win that one by 15, 20 points. Or it could be one of those situations where maybe they just can't get the rhythm that they need or the consistency that they're looking for, and they lose game six by 15, 20 points against Miami. I don't see that happening, though. I do think that Philly is in a little bit of trouble after that game five performance, but not to the point where they're just done and it's over with. I think going into this game six, the one thing that I'm looking for is Joel Embiid and James Harden to show out. There have been times, there have been flashes where both these guys have been on point with their production, but I need to see more from James. James is really the key piece for Philly here. Granted, I understand that Tyrese Maxey and Tobias Harris have had their flash moments in this series, but James, they brought him here for a reason. They traded Ben Simmons away to bring in probably one of the most prolific scorers the NBA has in this generation with James Harden. And despite the fact that a lot of people were making comparisons about Joel Embiid and James Harden being very similar to Kobe and Shaq, which I thought was disrespectful that comparison was even being made, it hasn't really worked out to the extent that a lot of people originally anticipated. But I do think that in this game six, I think both of them have great games. I think Joel is going to bring out essentially that MVP type of performance where he's going to put up 30, 35 points. And I think James is going to chip in for a solid 25 piece. And then if they're able to get decent production from Tyrese Maxey and Tobias Harris, I'm not saying that they have to go out there and score 25, 30 points, but if they can get 15, maybe even 20 points, that puts Philly in the driver's seat to force Miami into a situation where the series goes back to game seven. And at that point, it's a toss up. You never know how those game sevens play out. It's a lot of pressure for both teams to get that. But this is one of those situations where I think Philly got so embarrassed in game six. They knew that that wasn't them. They got distracted maybe because of what Kevin was mentioning with Joel Embiid not getting the MVP. And sometimes you get distracted and you just lose a game that way going into it. But I mean, I have to say, Miami looks great in that game six. Um, they have looked like the better team overall in this series compared to the 76ers. But I'm not going to count out the 76ers. I mean, they have a pretty solid lineup to work with here. When you have a lineup that consists of Joel Embiid, James Harden, Tyrese Maxey, and Tobias Harris, those are four studs to work with. And I think if they're able to get decent production from all of them, I could see Philly putting up at least 110 points when it's all said and done. And I think in the end, I think Philly's defense is going to be good enough to get by Miami in this one and force a game seven. I think it's going to be a relatively close game. I don't see this one being like a blowout from either team. But I do think that the Sixers win this game six by maybe, I'm going to say somewhere between 5 to 8 points. And I do think that Joel and James are going to be the biggest difference makers in this game. And if you're a 76ers fan, you better hope that James Harden shows up. Because if he doesn't, really this season with James has been largely a disappointment. And, hopefully for the 76ers fans, James shows up and gets them to a game seven. I mean, this has been a very compelling series. Even though that I said that Miami has been the better team this series, I'm not discounting what the 76ers have to offer. I do think that they have the pieces to force a game seven, and I do think that they will. So I'm going with the 76ers in game six, and it should be a fun finish when this series goes to game seven, if it does. But I'm basing it off of a game six win, really. That's just how I see it.